Today on the Milk Making Minutes, you will hear my guest tell a story of a breastfeeding journey which she describes as a spiritual awakening. Dr. Beata tampered her intuition for 13 months as she experienced an uncomfortable latch and symptoms of undiagnosed tethered oral ties while caring for a baby with symptoms of colic and food allergies in breast milk. Listen to her inspiring journey of tuning into her intuition to get the help she needed for herself and her baby, and discovering other root causes of her baby's tension along the way. Spoiler alert, the solutions were not all found in changing the baby. This is a great story for anxious moms and lactation professionals alike. Listen to learn new tools for resolving root causes for common baby concerns. When I began breastfeeding, I was blindsided by how difficult it was. I may have thought I was prepared, but having known only a handful of people who had ever breastfed and only seeing it up close from a couple of them, I had a huge learning curve. Since then, I've become a doula, a lactation consultant, and a childbirth educator. I'm your host, Lo Nigrosh, and I welcome you to the Milk Making Minutes, where we explore breastfeeding experiences through the lens of systemic barriers, so that you know your breastfeeding struggles are not your fault, and your triumphs really are the miracles you feel they are. Hi, Dr. Beata. Welcome to the Milk Making Minutes. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you so much for having me, Lo. I'm excited to be here.
Me too. So why don't you take a minute to introduce yourself?
Thank you. So my name is Dr. Beata Hadashim, and I'm a holistic and integrative doctor of physical therapy. And our whole journey started back in 2017 when my daughter was born. And we experienced some breastfeeding challenges, some medical and health challenges. And it was actually, quite honestly, a spiritual awakening, our breastfeeding journey and this motherhood experience. Now I'm very grateful to be able to help other moms awaken their intuition, kind of give meaning and understanding to their health challenges and their little ones' health challenges, and be able to heal holistically. Something I focus on is identifying and addressing root causes, and all for the greater good so that we can be happier, healthier, we can have more energy, we can be more present with our children, and heal ourselves and future generations to come.
Wow, that's amazing. Yeah, we hear this idea of intergenerational trauma, and we don't talk as much about the intergenerational healing, the opposite of that, the yin and the yang. But
Mm-hmm.
I feel it happening in my family. And I know that with breastfeeding in particular, I feel the change that I am making for my family moving forward, not just for my daughter, but for my son too. I did not expect motherhood to be as impactful as it was for me. I did not expect it to change me as much as it did.
Definitely. I hear you.
Yeah. Yeah. So I'm so excited to hear how that happened for you, and then also
Yeah.
to hear about some of the resources that you offer people.
Great. Thank you.
Yeah. So before we get into what it was like for you, what was your exposure to breastfeeding before it was your turn?
Right. So beforehand, it was very interesting. I was breastfed until about 6 months old. And when I asked my mom about it, she just said, yeah, you just kind of figured it out. And then started biting me. And that was it, and we just stopped. And there wasn't much advice. When we think of like the village and we think of elders and whatnot, my mom just didn't have much to say, which is okay. So when I was going into it, I was already on my health journey and my health awakening for, at that point, I'm trying to think, probably 8 or 9 years. So I was already very health conscious and aware and knew that I wanted to breastfeed, knew that in my heart, it felt like that was going to be the best thing for us. And I have to say, I was not prepared for it. I, looked up a couple of things online and you hear, some of the challenges and whatnot, but you think, oh, no, that's not going to happen to us and everything's going to be okay. So I definitely felt unprepared and at the time unsupported greatly. So that's kind of where it comes full circle, where now I just love being able to help support others in the ways that I can as well.
Yeah. And did you have peers who had breastfed, or did you see it up close at all while you were pregnant or before you were pregnant?
I'm trying to think. Actually, I did. One friend did breastfeed. Her daughter was born 4 months before mine. And actually, now that I think about it, there was another friend who was attempted to breastfeed about 6 months before my daughter was born. And actually, both of them had challenges and had all sorts of things come up. So now that you mentioned that, now that I think about it, I actually had quite a bit of anxiety around it because I heard these stories from my friends and how it didn't work out for them. So then there were things that with my doula, I was like, all right, well, how do I do this? How do I make sure that, this is successful? And so in a way, it was good to kind of have a little bit of that preparation for my doula, or at least know some of the questions to ask or things to be aware of. However, there was some anxiety around it as well. Am I going to screw this up? Or, what am I going to do wrong, et cetera? So definitely interesting that you asked that question and that it came up afterwards.
Yeah, it's a fine line between knowing in advance the
Mhm.
problems that could arise so
Right.
that you can have an awareness of how to address them, and hearing horror stories, because that can plant a seed of doubt that it might not be possible for you.
Right.
That's true of breastfeeding, it's also true of birth. And that makes that has an impact when you're not
Hmm.
seeing it anywhere and everywhere, and there is this undercurrent societally that it could be difficult.
Definitely. Especially with the older children too, I could add, because
Yes.
with babies, I think there's a little bit more acceptance. But when there's a 4-year-old coming up, I definitely get some looks and some, stares, and it's okay. And it's taken me quite a bit of work to be able to be okay with it.
I still did it,
Yeah.
but I felt that pressure of, "Don't you dare say anything to me,"
Right. Right.
you just feel that you feel the pressure cooker start to build.
Definitely. And it's important to acknowledge that too, because then we can kind of work through it. Because
Mhm.
otherwise, there were times where I tried to ignore that. And then that just becomes, again, kind of some unresolved emotions added in. And then that changes our experience as well.
So was there anything that happened during your birth that you feel impacted the start of your breastfeeding journey?
Definitely. So I'm having a natural birth. And one of the big reasons why I wanted a doula there with me. And I ended up testing positive weeks before, positive for GBS. And this is ultimately my intuition kind of was coming in during pregnancy. That's kind of the way I describe it. So part of my intuition knew I needed that support. So that's why I hired the doula. And there were parts of my intuition that I ignored at the time. So I had the GBS test, I can't remember, maybe 3 weeks before it was positive, and I'm going, that doesn't feel right to me. Let's do it again. So a week before our birth, I had the test again. It tested negative. And of course, with one positive test, you're going to get a lot of pressure from providers about all the possible, horrific things that can happen to your baby. And even though I went into the hospital going, no, my most recent test was negative. I know that I don't need the antibiotics. My most recent test was negative. As much as I told myself that, the second the doctor said, well, you had a positive test, so your baby can have XYZ, I, for that moment, abandoned my intuition and said, okay, go ahead, give me the antibiotics. And around this topic, I don't want anyone to feel shame or guilty or anything like that. It was just for myself and our situation, a moment where I remember distinctly pushing my intuition aside and letting fear take over. And that's when I gave my power up at that moment. So we went on to be able to have a natural birth. There were some little kind of holdups, which, happens. And my daughter was able to latch on right away, which was wonderful. And that moment, we'll cherish forever. And shortly after, I ended up having postpartum preeclampsia. So my blood pressure skyrocketed. And they did my blood work and tested, urine, et cetera. I had all the markers. So then I went on, I want to say it's sulfur, or I forget the exact medication right now, but they put me on a IV drip to get my pressure down. It didn't work. So my first hours and day with my baby, I was very drowsy, kind of out of it, which was nice because at that point she actually slept, which was okay. So I was able to rest. And at this point, I recognize how some of that played an impact that whole journey on our breastfeeding experience as well. And so after getting down to the, I believe it was the step down unit, I was able to, get off of the heavy duty medication and take, just oral medication at that point. And we actually saw 4 lactation consultants in the hospital. And it was one of those things, my intuition was kicking back on. So I wanted more support. Like literally every shift change, I was like, I want the lactation consultant to come here. I want the lactation consultant to come in here because it didn't quite feel right. My daughter was having a hard time latching on one side. There was some pain. And then the other thing is you hear like, oh, your nipples have to toughen up. And I don't believe that to be true. It shouldn't be painful at all. But at the time, the lactation consultants were telling me that as well in the hospital. So even though I was expressing that there was something going on that I needed help with, most of them came and said, no, she's latching on fine. She's suckling fine. Don't worry about it. And so those voices stayed in the back of my head for over a year before I decided to reach out and get lactation support, which, again, that was my me pushing my intuition aside and going, nope, these people know what they're talking about. I'm going to listen to that. I kind of ignored that intuitive instinct. So yeah, that was kind of the hospital experience there.
This whole time, I've just been alternating between nodding my head yes and shaking my head no.
Right.
Because the power that anyone in a hospital setting has for us to tamper our intuition is so huge that any of us who are practitioners, and you're a practitioner too,
Right.
we all have to hear this again and again. It's a job for us, and we see so many people that we forget sometimes that this is a human being who knows their body. And we have to empower these human beings, these mothers, these women whose pain signals have been ignored again and again by providers. Like we are ignored again and again. And lactation consultants who are listening, stop telling people your latch is fine.
Right.
If somebody says they are in pain, believe them. And if you are listening and you are breastfeeding your baby and you are in pain, you're right. You are in pain. Trust that. And Dr. Beata is right. Pain and breastfeeding are not supposed to go together. And too many of us think, maybe they're right. They said the latch looked fine. I don't know how many times I've heard this. I don't know how many times I see it on breastfeeding support groups online. The lactation consultant told me my latch looks fine. We have to stop telling women this.
And the crazy thing is now knowing what I know, 3 of the lactation consultants never looked in my daughter's mouth. One looked in and said, oh, she may have a little lip tie. Don't worry about it. So they never did a proper assessment. They never did an actual evaluation. That was one of the things that we had. She actually had 4 oral ties. I didn't even know there were 4 possible at the time. And, it was completely missed. And that's the beauty of our body too, because I had an oversupply. So I was able to breastfeed because that's the thing. She was gaining, even with some of the health things that we had going on. She was gaining, she was staying on her curve. She had great output. So that intuition, and it's so powerful what you said, because that intuition of mine was being just pushed and pushed and pushed to the side more and more, because all these quote unquote facts were lining up that, yeah, the latch should be fine because she is gaining, because she does have output, et cetera, et cetera. But I knew, and I just wasn't listening to myself at the end of the day.
Were there any other, even though she was gaining, even though she was on her curve, were there any other clues in looking back that you can point to say, Oh, yeah, there were definitely oral ties. Were
right?
there other things that you can point to now?
Yeah. So the lipstick shaped nipple, that's a tongue twister.
Mhm.
Definitely pain as well. She wasn't able to like even hold a pacifier in her mouth. Like we tried pacifiers at one point and she wasn't like, it just was not working. No matter, we tried like so many different ones. What were the other things? And quite honestly, from my side of things with the oversupply, I didn't realize what was happening because she had the green frothy poop that, what now I know is a flag that, hey, there's something going on. And, the colic, she was screaming for hours. And it was this, love hate relationship because she would be happy on the breast. So if she was latched on, she was happy. But at the same time, that oversupply was creating some pain for her as well. And so it was this, back and forth because then she was in pain and she wanted to be on the breast more. And that was creating some discomfort for her. So it was just this cycle going back and forth before we even got down to the more health related things.
Mm. And what was her pediatrician saying about this? Because I'm sure as a new mom, you were bringing this up to the pediatrician.
Right, definitely. And, the pediatrician was just, again, she listened, but was kind of dismissive. So she said, oh, okay, yeah, that's okay. Don't worry about that. Again, they go back. My pediatrician went back to, she's gaining weight. She has output. Don't worry about it. I felt like I was being invalidated because I was just quote unquote a first time mom. So, I think they felt possibly that I was just anxious and just worried about things. And, we're just like, no, no, trying to calm me down. Don't worry about it. That's okay. They were thankfully supportive of the breastfeeding. So I remember them cheering me on like, hey, she gained, XYZ ounces since last time. That's great. So that was great to have a little bit of motivation. However, that part of the challenges was definitely being dismissed.
Yeah. So, what was the impetus at 1 year for you to
Right.
finally say, I'm going to get some help here?
Yeah. So I'll backtrack just a little bit to give a little
Hmm.
context with that.
Yeah.
And so around 3 weeks old, my daughter started having bloody stools. So visible, bright red blood. And again, we went to the pediatrician. I was extremely worried. That was the night that I stayed up all night, Googling, searching, whatever, and I found a variety of things. I found that she's allergic to breast milk. I found that she's allergic to things in my breast milk. I found that it was lactation related. I found that she could have like a deadly virus going on. So there were so many things that I found there. And I kind of created my own diagnosis after hours of Googling. And I went to the pediatrician and said, hey, this is what I think is going on. And she said, all right, yeah, you're right. Maybe she does have a dairy allergy and just cut out dairy. So I said, "Oh, okay. All right, I can do that." And I've done different elimination diets in the past and kind of detox diets. So I'm like, okay, I can do that. And things improved a little bit, but they never got better. So then I went down the route. I skipped a lot of steps and I jumped into a major elimination diet, which I do not recommend at this point. And again, saw some improvement, but things never got better. Along with the colic and the bloody stools, my daughter also had reflux. She had eczema. You could just tell that she was not a content baby. Again, she wanted to be latched on all the time. And even latch on, she would take hours to actually fall asleep. So even, at the breast, she would just have so much tension in her little body. And then it took, 3, 4 hours sometimes before her little body, I could feel it relax. And would know that she finally fell asleep. So there were all these signs. And that was part of it that I didn't really know where to go. I didn't really know what to do. So I went on Google, I went on Facebook because I was bringing these concerns up to our pediatrician. And the second time that we went in, she goes, oh, okay, go dairy and soy free. I'm like, but I'm already like top 10 free. You're like, oh, this is not helping. What's going on? And so the lack of just guidance and even quite honestly, education from the pediatrician side on these topics, definitely shaped our experience. And that continued on for 13 months And the thing is, I was in all sorts of Facebook groups, et cetera. So I saw people talking about ties. I saw people talking about oral ties, lip ties, tongue ties. And in the back of my head, it was just those lactation consultants from the hospital. No, no, no. She doesn't have that. Her latch was fine. She said she just had a mild lip tie. That's nothing to worry about. And so finally at 13 months, my intuition just kicked on and said, no, go get help for this. So we reached out to an IBCLC locally, and she did the best assessment that she could with a 13-month-old who had teeth and was very willing to bite at that point. The other thing I forgot to mention, there was a lot of clicking when she was nursing. That's a big one as well. And she said, she's got a lot of signs. She goes, but she is 13 months. How much longer are you going to breastfeed for? And I said, well, I don't know. Like, I'm surprised I honestly made it this far, And she said, well, if you want to, you can go see a preferred provider. It's kind of up to you. And so there was a moment there where my intuition just took over. And I said, yes, I am going to go see a preferred provider. We saw a wonderful one in less than 30 seconds. He did the evaluation and said, yep, she's got 4 ties. And I said, 4? I said, I thought there were 2. And he goes, well, she's got buckle ties on the sides too. And I go, oh, I didn't even know that existed.
When a pediatric dentist that specializes in tethered oral ties does an evaluation, they are looking for a tongue tie, a lip tie, or buccal ties. The tongue tie can either be anterior, which is seen more towards the front of the mouth, or posterior, which is seen more towards the back and is often missed. The lip tie has still not been called out by the Academy of Breastfeeding Medicine in its clinical protocol number 8 as something that needs to be revised, but many IBCLCs and pediatric dentists that specialize in helping parents navigating breastfeeding with tethered oral ties have found that it is important to resolve the lip tie in order to resolve breastfeeding problems. And then finally, the buccal ties are tight frenulum connecting the buccal pads of the cheeks to the upper gums. A competent tethered oral tie expert can evaluate a baby to determine the extent to which any of these ties may be interfering with breastfeeding, bottle feeding, sucking, excessive gas, clicking sounds, colic, reflux, milk leaking out, and other potential problems down the line as well. Some studies show that 1 in 10 babies that have a tongue tie release also have a buccal tie release. So it was these buccal ties that Dr. Beata is referring to that were done for her baby, in addition to the tongue tie and the lip tie, for a total of 4 tethered oral tie releases.
I know the posterior tongue ties get missed quite often. And so we were very grateful to have that taken care of. And right after the procedure, she latched on and it felt so different. That is all I can say. I was like, oh. And, when I remember when I first started breastfeeding, my toes would curl from the pain. And it was one of those things that I was just like, this doesn't feel right. But again, they said it was okay. I'm just gonna, just truck on and, it'll be okay. And it was interesting because the pain did lessen. However, I think that was more a matter of maybe getting used to it, habituation, rather than, the latch improving. So that definitely made a big difference in my daughter's reflux and made a big difference in her explosive poops. And that's the thing. It wasn't the whole resolution for us. There were other root causes that still needed to be addressed. However, this was a huge root cause that I missed right from the beginning. And, when we talk about kind of the system, and, I feel like the practitioners that we worked with, the system of healthcare just wasn't there to support us through that time. And, it's part of our journey. And again, we do the best that we can with what we know. So now that's one of the first things that I recommend is that anyone having any GI even symptoms, I always recommend go see an IBCLC. Make sure there are any ties. Make sure you don't have an oversupply. Learn how to manage your supply if it is, oversupply. And that's one of my passions is just getting as many people to an IBCLC as I can instead of going down this crazy elimination diet route if you don't have to, because I can say that's very stressful and mom, it is life-changing. And sometimes that still does need to be done, but let's not miss the basics. Let's not miss what's right in front of us. And, that's one of my main messages is I hope I can just support and encourage moms to go get lactation support. Even if 4 or 5 other lactation consultants did already say, no, 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 it's fine. If you know in your heart, if your intuition is telling you, your mama instinct is telling you there's something not right, go and get some help, see someone. And even if that first person that you see doesn't have all the answers, go see another. Go see practitioners until you get an answer that feels good in your heart to you. Don't let that intuition get pushed aside.
Yeah. And you said you felt immediate relief.
It was very different when she latched on afterwards. I mean, it felt completely different. The no pain, it felt, I don't know what the best way to describe it is, but just like a different baby. If I had my eyes closed, I would have felt like it was a different baby at my breast than my child,
Mm.
my daughter. Yeah.
Mm. Wow. And what was the aftercare like?
Yeah. So we did actually, you know what? We did not see an IVCLC after, which in hindsight, I think would have been a good thing to do. But we did go to a body worker for aftercare. And that was definitely helpful because the ties are not in isolation. There's other fascial, the mouth, the muscles, they've been accustomed to working in a certain way for so long. And myself as a body worker, as a physical therapist, it's something that I know and I practice with my patients as well. But it was just a very different way of looking at it through oral function, because that's one area that as a physical therapist, I actually did not have a whole lot of training in. So I was very happy to go see someone who was skilled in this and who also provider we saw is excellent at working with these little ones, because again, my daughter had teeth and she was okay with biting people. So just the way that she was able to approach my daughter, and I give her a lot of credit even to this day. I work with adults mainly in the outpatient orthopedic population, and adults follow directions. They can lay down when you want them to lay down, etc. So again, I highly recommend seeing a body worker who's specifically trained in this, because there were lots of places of tension that she was able to identify for me and then give us some exercises for home that I could continue with, which I think was crucial in the process afterwards. And even with the aftercare that we did have, there was some reattachment. So that was not a great experience, where I called, the office and they said, well, you're going to put your finger in there and you're going to snap it. And I was just like, oh my gosh. But, we did do it, and I'm happy we did, because now when she opens her mouth, you can see the exact place, even to this day, where the incision was made, and it's, open. And, part of me is like, if I didn't snap it at that point, we would have been going back for another surgery. So that was not a comfortable experience, but one that I'm happy we kind of did get to go through and learn from as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you love to read about pregnancy, childbirth, and breastfeeding? Are you looking for books to help you become a more confident parent? Or perhaps books to help you understand what went wrong with your breastfeeding journey, or to do better next time with breastfeeding? Or do your kids have questions about breastfeeding or pregnancy, but you don't really know how to answer them? Would you prefer to have a curated list on these topics? Go to the link in the show notes to my new affiliated bookshop. Every purchase you make benefits the Milk Making Minutes. But better than that, these books are vetted. I've read them all, and I feel very confident recommending them to you. I'll be adding to them continuously, so go to that link when you want to purchase a book. It will help the show, and you can feel confident it will be a purchase you will enjoy. So the type of body work you did was craniosacral therapy?
Right. Craniosacral with a little bit of chiropractic.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. And what happens is the tongue, the oral ties are formed in utero. So the tightness of all the muscles that are connected to those tissues have been happening for months and months and months at that point. So once you release the ties, the muscles are still conditioned to work in the same way as they've been working with the ties. So they need to learn to move in a new way. And so if you go somewhere and they just release the ties and send you on your way, you may experience some relief. Like you said, you experienced relief immediately, but you'll experience the greatest amount of progress and change if you really view it holistically and see it as a big picture problem. And if you're really committed to having the most improvement, if you view it holistically and get all of the work done that needs to happen, then you'll see the most improvement over time.
Definitely.
How frequently did you need to go to do the chiropractic work and the craniosacral therapy? Do you remember?
I want to say about once a week. I don't
Mm-hmm.
quite remember exactly though, but it was someone we saw her for a few months. And then we actually still see her now kind of on an as needed basis just for whole body care, which is always nice.
Mm-hmm.
But in that initial period, yeah, it was definitely, I think it was once a week.
And it was one person who did both, or a chiropractor and
Yes, she's trained in both. Exactly. Yep.
okay. What happened symptomatically after the tongue tie releases with your daughter's health? Did you see improvements over time?
Yeah, we did. So her reflux improved drastically. She wasn't spitting up all the time, and that she would have this very extended posture with her neck extended. So she stopped having that after the release of the ties as well. So you could tell that it was just irritating her esophagus and her tract going down. And her poops, she always had these very like explosive poops. So again, like not being able to manage the flow or that altered latch was, I don't know if it was more gas coming in or air coming in or the exact reason, but her poop stopped being so explosive. And so that wasn't as irritating to her GI tract as well. So that definitely helped part of the healing process move forward as well.
Hmm. And did you need to continue with the elimination diet?
So in our case, we still did have the food allergies through breast milk.
Mm-hmm.
So we did need to continue through with that. But there have been moms that I've worked with that once they saw the IVCLC, they didn't need to continue eliminating or eliminate at all because they addressed that root cause. And to me, that's kind of like the easiest kind of route to go. If you're breastfeeding, you're seeing these signs and symptoms, go ahead and see a lactation consultant because that management can take care of many of the signs and symptoms that you may be seeing is what I'm trying to say, right? Go get the lowest hanging fruit first, get that taken care of. And then if we need to, we can work down the process to figure out other root causes.
So you did this body work and you continued with the elimination diet, and your daughter's now 13, 14, 15 months. Did you see a change in her disposition? You said she was kind of, you know, she was tense a lot. She cried a lot. It was hard for her to sleep. Did you see any changes there?
So I did. There was definitely some improvement, and we did have multiple root causes to still look at. So there were still foods that she was reacting to. So we still had quite a bit of a journey. And at the same time, around then, about when she was 18 months, I started becoming aware of other potential root causes. And at the time, I didn't really realize what they were. But what I found was different strategies and practices of mindfulness. And why I thought this was really interesting for me was that with my background, I knew about hormones, I knew about the exchange through breast milk as well. And what I wasn't looking at was my emotional state. So during this entire time, I was extremely anxious. My anxiety was spiraling out of control. This is where the spiritual awakening happens. I started recognizing that the support system that I had wasn't all that supportive. There was a lot of shame, a lot of judgment. There was a lot of talking down to. There was a lot of invalidating my intuition as well, but also straight up telling me I was wrong. And quite honestly, my body was in a state of fight or flight constantly. And I started learning, one, I knew something was not going right in my body. So that's why I found this mindfulness practice, and I think it resonated so much because that was what I needed at the moment. I needed to regulate my nervous system. And then I started connecting the pieces. So when we're in a state of fight or flight, we secrete cortisol. Cortisol is meant to put us into a mode of either running away from, let's say, a tiger or fighting the tiger to save our life. Now, that is a really important part of our nervous system, and we're not supposed to live there all the time. So when our body is continuously secreting this cortisol, our body is continuously in this fight or flight response. We can't think as clearly. Our body is in do or like action versus any thinking or consideration. At the same time, this cortisol is being transferred through our breast milk to our babies. So when we're in this emotional state, our baby is literally getting supercharged with cortisol at the same time, which contributes to the crying, which contributes to the colic, which contributes to not feeling well all the time, because they're getting this direct hormonal response from our bodies. Our bodies are signaling that it's not safe to them.
Dr. Beata is referring to a phenomenon that researchers call lactational programming hypothesis. Researchers of one longitudinal study published in the Journal of Developmental Psychobiology, that I'll link in the show notes, said this, quote, "After birth and during lactation, mothers can still transfer physiological signals to the infant through the biological constituents of breast milk." Hind et al., 2014, including cortisol. Cortisol concentrations are transferred from plasma to breast milk, as there is no mammary synthesis of cortisol. Hamosh, 2001. End quote.
So our babies, our little ones, are so in tune with our energies, especially with mom, because we spend so much time in close proximity. And that directly affects their disposition, how easily they're going to fall asleep. Because if we don't feel safe, we're not going to fall asleep easily. We're going to be hyper alert and hyper vigilant. We're going to wake up multiple times in the night. So even though there were other things going on as well, there was a period when my daughter literally woke up every 20 minutes all night long. And at the time, I thought it was a quote unquote sleep regression. That is not a sleep regression, especially if it lasts for months. But then again, that's what I was told. Oh, it's just the sleep regression. Don't worry about it. So when we can start looking holistically at many possible root causes, many factors that are creating this experience, then we can start seeing this resolution of signs and symptoms. And the key is that everyone's going to have different root causes, and everyone's going to have a different kind of complexity in there. But that for us was a huge one. Once I started regulating my nervous system, then my daughter was getting messages hormonally, but also energetically, that it's okay, it's safe. And really, it took us, quite honestly, years for me to put all those pieces together and to have her feel safe and to feel calm on multiple levels when addressing those root causes. It's a concept that I had never heard of before that point where I was starting to put pieces together, and that, quite honestly, isn't talked about a lot, especially with colic. Colic is something that is quite common, I would say. There's many, kids that you hear that have colic. And I would bet that the majority of those moms have anxiety, and that when we can start addressing that and identifying it, and a lot of that is getting support, because I felt completely overwhelmed going on a strict elimination diet, not having supportive family members around me, you feel all alone. And so that support is important. Community is so important. Once I started finding other moms who were on a similar journey, talk about synchronicity. There was one literally a town over from me that we got introduced to at the farmer's market. And her daughter was a year older than my daughter, same exact condition and everything. It was just such a nice feeling to know that I wasn't alone. When we first talked, I was like, oh my gosh, I feel like I'm talking to myself in the future, like a year from now, which was such a wonderful moment. And she has just like the biggest heart and helped, quite honestly, kind of talk me down a ledge at that point. That's what I needed in that part of our journey, that understanding, someone to really listen and say, hey, I've been through this. I know what you're going through. I completely get it. That was so validating. I'm going to try not to tear up right now, but that moment was just so beautiful. And quite honestly, that's what motivated a lot of the change. Feeling heard, feeling understood, feeling validated. And at the same time, that is when I started really reaching out for a lot of support. So I had a great therapist. I had coaches and mentors that I worked with. We found wonderful practitioners who knew what we were talking about and who could help us on our journey. And quite honestly, when we created that team, and it started with boundaries, that me putting my foot down and saying, no, I am going to keep looking for help. And it's this empowerment that I really want to, again, kind of send to moms, because it's so important to listen again to that intuition, but also not be afraid to like stand up for what feels best to you.
Yeah, so that's a great segue into talking about you did all this work for yourself. You're still doing this work.
Right.
I think this is something that won't ever end.
Yes.
I have times in this work for myself where I feel like I'm killing it, I'm doing great. And then I have times where I'm like, whoa, I need to really tune in again. It feels like it's really fluid. But you have now created a community so that other people can start to tune in and feel empowered, but do it in a community. So talk to us both about your community and then also the book that you've written.
Yeah, thank you. The Mindful Mom Circle is something I created, and it actually started as mindful breastfeeding. And quite honestly, this group, this audience is what's closest to my heart. Breastfeeding moms who, are experiencing colic or eczema, reflux, food allergies, intolerances, sensitivities, sensory needs. That is, the group that's closest to my heart, just because I'm going through it as well. And I also recognize that there's a greater need because some of these moms may not be continuing breastfeeding. They may switch to formula, or maybe they just never really got a hang of it and they did go to formula, right? So these health conditions do not just go away by switching to formula. And that's something that is important to mention as well, because that is sometimes made out to be like the solution to things, right? But it's not always the case. For some, it is. And that's wonderful if it is. And for some moms, again, in your heart, if you're saying this is not for me and I need to go to formula, I encourage you to do that. So that's the focus of the Mindful Mom Circle, is to create a supportive and empowering community where there is not just information, being shared as far as like educational information, but also mindset shifts, right? Different ways of thinking of things, different ways of looking at things. Even like you mentioned, sleep, right? And I also do provide coaching for those who do need the specific nutrition help, gut health help, emotional healing, energetic healing, even spiritual healing. And then there's different workshops that I offer as well. So there is a free resource page that I do have. It's www.holisticdrbeata.com/resources. And on there, I just have everything listed out. So no matter what challenges you may be going through, whether it is personal as far as anxiety or more mom support, self-care, self-love, or maybe it is more of sleep, or maybe it is baby with allergies or colic or reflux or eczema, you can find support there. Many of the resources, most of them are free. So it's a great way to get yourself some support. And the community is free as well on Facebook. And then there are options to work closer together. So there are some workshops that are paid depending on how in depth we go. They also come with Some of those paid ones come with free guidance calls as well, where we can connect one-on-one and get you customized support. And then there's consultations as well. But ultimately, it's just getting moms the support that I wish I had all those years ago.
Yeah, that's amazing. And I love this idea of recognizing that a lot of how our babies are feeling starts with us.
Hmm.
And I find it true with my almost 9-year-old and my almost 5-year-old.
Yeah,
It doesn't go away. That
right,
doesn't go away. And so much of what happens in my household starts with me. So
hmm,
much of the feelings in my household starts with me regulating myself.
right.
So I love that that's the shift that you work at helping people make, and that the community is all about empowering people to find their power and to find their calm. And I really encourage people to check out your Facebook community. Will you tell us the name of it?
Yes, holistic mindful moms. Yes.
Holistic Mindful Moms on Facebook. Okay, great.
Yeah.
And then the name of your book is called Breastfeeding
It
Bliss.
is, yes. Breastfeeding was how I went from anxious, sleepless nights to empowered, calm, and confident. So it is a raw and authentic account of our story, and really how it affects all aspects of life, including relationships, family, friends, even career changes, and how, again, this has been a total awakening for me. And I feel like a reborn person at times. So it's been really life changing, and it's interactive. So it has different mindfulness journal prompts in there, lots of resources. So you can, if you identify with some of these things, you know where to go to. You can look for help. And it's a short read. It's probably an hour or so to read the whole book. So I know for busy moms, it's doable in a nap or two.
Great. Okay. All right. We'll link that in the show notes so that people can find it. Well, Dr. Beata, thank you so much for coming on and sharing your personal story. I think there are going to be so many people who hear your story and think, oh my God, is she living my life?
Oh,
And they're going to relate and really want to check out your resources. So thank you for spending this time with me this morning.
oh, thank you so much, Lo. Thank you for having me. It was wonderful.
Today, we heard the story of a transformation from an anxious parent who was ignoring her intuition because professionals were telling her everything was fine, to an empowered mother who puts her foot down, stands up for herself and her daughter, and seeks the answers she needs to lead a peaceful and mindful life with her now still breastfeeding 5-year-old daughter. If anything Dr. Beata said resonates with you, be sure to find her Holistic Mindful Moms Facebook page, which is linked in the show notes. If all of the advice Dr. Beata got from professionals made you angry and frustrated, and you want to discuss why these systemic barriers and others exist and what we can do about them with a community of like-minded people, join my Milk Making Minutes community group on Facebook. I'll see you there.